Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwald. Since at least the Enlightenment, scholars have predicted that religion will eventually fall out of favor and a rising secularism will take its place. Recent trends have suggested that in America, religion is perhaps becoming less influential than in the past, and that our culture is, in fact, becoming more secular. Here to discuss the role of secularism and atheism in American life is Dr. Chris Bartel from Appalachian's Department of Philosophy and Religion. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you've been on our faculty for some years now. You're a philosopher. What's your area of expertise in the study of philosophy?
My main area of research is in the field of aesthetics and philosophy of art. So most of the work that I do looks at the way that we respond to works of art, the way that we analyze and criticize works of art, and I'm interested in the relationship between what people do in. Let me give you
Sure.
What I'm doing right now at the moment in my research is a work on violence in video games.
Right.
So I'm really interested in the way that people think of what they do in video games in relation to their real life, when knowing everything that we do in a video game is fiction. So it's this imaginary thing that we're participating in, and yet when I do bad things in the game, should I really feel bad about it? So that's part of what I'm looking at now.
That's really fascinating.
Thank you.
And in addition to your research and your teaching duties, you, I guess, head a club here.
Yes.
You're faculty advisor of the student.
Good luck.
Okay, right. The Student Association of Secular. You do it.
It doesn't
right?
roll off the tongue.
It
Yeah,
doesn't.
it's the name is the Secular Appalachian Student Society.
There we go. Okay.
So our acronym is SAS. That works better.
So you have in your club, or you focus on secularism, I guess, as a way of life, and that includes atheism. Is that
Yes,
correct?
right.
So can you maybe differentiate between, and these are terms we often use interchangeably, atheism, secularism, and agnosticism. What's the difference, and how would you differentiate between those terms?
Sure. Secularism, I think of it really as more of a political term. It's an umbrella term that really just stands for separation of church and state.
Okay.
That people who are interested in the separation of church and state would describe themselves as secularist, or they're pushing for a secular society. They tend to be atheist or agnostic, not exclusively. There are certainly religious people that are interested in secular political setup as well.
Right.
But the secular movement, I think, largely is populated by people who would identify as atheist and agnostic.
So in your secularism club, well, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
That's
I asked you to, in your secularism club, you would have atheists and agnostics and students, I suppose, who would identify as either atheist or agnostic.
Yes, the majority of the students in the club, and the club changes from year to year. Some years it's really big, some years it's really small. Some years the club is very active. They want to do a lot of outreach work, they do charity work. Some years they want to go out and protest against the angry preachers that come to campus, and I always tell them not to do that, but they want to. Some years they're very active, and some years they're very insular, and they're very, actually, kind of on edge. A lot of them don't want to be identified to their parents or to the wider community as being atheist or agnostic. I actually, when you invited me on the show, I asked a couple of students who are very active in the club if they wanted to be involved, and they just don't want their face on camera.
So I would imagine that maybe some of the students that you have in your club perhaps were raised in a religious background, and now they're in this kind of time period in their lives when they're examining beliefs, examining their own intellectual journey, and are beginning to identify outside of the religious world. And it must be, is that a kind of common profile?
That's common. What I've been really surprised at is the number of students who have described privately feeling atheist much of their lives, but not publicly admitting it to their parents. I've had a number of students actually come into my office to talk about troubles that they're having at home, and the main thing that they're worried about is that if mom and dad find out that they're atheist, they will pull them out of college.
To blame the college experience, is that?
That might be part of it. I don't know. Perhaps that is.
Well, I think a lot of times from very conservative religious groups, there's concern about sending their kids to secular universities where they'll encounter alternative ideologies and alternative perspectives on the world. So that might be some concern that somehow the college experience is undermining intellectually their faith or their belief in God.
Yeah, I can see that. I know, I mean, it's tough, isn't it? Because it's our job to challenge students to think about things that they're not comfortable with.
Right, yes.
That's what we're paid for.
Exactly.
At the same time, I don't want to be that guy. When I became atheist.
Oh, so you would consider yourself atheist?
Yes,
Okay.
I was raised Catholic. When I was younger, I went to Catholic middle school, Catholic high school. I was an altar boy. I sincerely believed it. So when I started to get out of atheism, it was like two things that got me out of religion and into atheism. One was, for years I'd been going to church with my parents. And both of my parents were previously divorced and remarried. So they're married together, they're on the second marriage. I'm the product of their second marriage.
Okay.
So my parents are both divorcees. My father and I would go up and get the communion. My mother never would. And that always confused me. Why is it that Dad and I go and get the communion, but Mom doesn't? And when I was a kid, I guess I wasn't a very reflective kid, because I just kind of thought she was saving our seat or something. Or I don't know. But it wasn't until years later, when I was probably 17 or 18, that I asked my mother why she did that. And she said, it's because I'm a divorcee. And according to the Catholic Church, divorcees can't receive the communion, which confused me because my dad did. So it's okay for him, but not her.
Was it okay in the eyes of the Catholic Church for him to?
I don't know. I don't know that he cared.
Okay. All right. I don't know. Maybe it was his interpretation of the rule. But
maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But my mother didn't, and that really bugged me. And that really bugged me a lot more than I can really explain. It offended me so much that my mother isn't good enough for the Catholic Church. That woman is a saint.
Right.
I know she's a saint because she let me and my siblings live. Like, we were awful, and yet she let us live. So the fact that the Catholic Church saw her as not quite good enough, just that kind of started me on the journey of thinking there's something wrong here.
Right.
And that didn't make me into an atheist. That made me look at other churches. So I looked at the Baptist Church. I looked at the Episcopal Church. I liked the Episcopals because they were a lot like Catholics, but not. But they were different. And I started looking at Eastern religions and so on. And it was in college, when I was taking classes in psychology, that I met this psychology professor who I loved. I loved this guy. I thought he was great. But one day in class, he was talking about the nature of belief. And he asked the class in this really snide, really offensive tone of voice, he asked the class, do any of you still believe in God? And many of the students in the class raised their hands, but I didn't. And it bugged me that I didn't, because at the time I was still going to church. I still believed in God.
Right.
But I didn't raise my hand because it was his tone of voice, and I felt this sense of shame. And even though, like that, from that moment, I started to think, well, maybe I didn't raise my hand because I genuinely don't believe it. So that guy was the guy who kind of pushed me over the edge to make me really consider what I actually believe. But to this day, I still resent him, because that was such a snide and just awful experience to go through, that sense of shame with this faculty member that I really admired. I never want to be that faculty member to our students.
Right.
I don't want to be that guy.
Well, I think that's the sort of experience that some conservative religious parents fear. That there will be, you might call them aggressive or crusading deists or atheists.
I think of them as vindictive atheists.
Vindictive atheists. Okay, so you don't want to encounter that person.
Yeah. And I don't want to embody that.
Okay. But what you just described in your own journey sounds very familiar to me. I mean, it starts with the reaction to what you perceive as hypocrisy in religious institutions. And in fact, a lot of young people who cite atheism as their choice will say that what pushed them on that journey was hypocrisy of religion. So that's a common kind of theme.
Something structural about the institution.
That's right. That's right. And then you went through a seeking phase. and an intellectual reflective stage, all to arrive at a point where you could claim whatever it is you think, faith or not faith, as your own. And that's kind of a common path, and a common journey. And I think it's understandable that what you've described as a late teenager, late adolescent, young adult, that seems to be the time period where most kids will go through some sort of similar kind of journey.
Yeah, I didn't entirely embrace the idea that I was atheist until probably I was late 20s, early 30s. And that was, it was partly because of what I was doing in philosophy, that I was studying philosophy, and I was trained in how to rigorously analyze beliefs, and I'd come to realize that there's a certain set of beliefs that I bracket off as like, those I won't analyze, but everything else I will.
Right.
I hold, science to a really high, rigorous level of analysis, but my religious beliefs, I bracket those off. And then eventually I realized I can't do that anymore.
Well, that's the challenge, is to get students to think critically about their faith, about their own religion. And some of them will land in the atheist camp. The great majority reclaim their faith for themselves. But the process is similar. Through critical analysis and intellectual analysis. It takes that, I think, to really claim a faith or position as your own.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the history of philosophy, there's been great philosophical work done on trying to defend theological points, and I really admire those philosophers for the rigor that they've shown. I don't agree with them.
Right.
Now I don't agree with them, but that's something I can admire, and I try to show that to the students. Like, you can admire this even if you don't believe it. I'm not asking anybody to believe, I'm asking them to think.
Right. Well, what you described is a great analysis of kind of an individual's interaction with faith and intellectualism, and whether or not they want to believe in God. Let's shift focus just a little bit. I've got a few charts that, if we can get up on the screen, we can look at and talk about. But just as a kind of introduction to these charts and statistics, there have been a number of studies recently done on the American population about faith and belief and affiliation with religious institutions. And the one thing they all have in common is that they show pretty persuasively that affiliation with formal religious institutions is dropping in America. Not alarmingly so, but a kind of consistent trend downward.
Depends on who you're asking.
Well, true, that's right. Well, I think it's something, 78% of the American population still identifies as Christian. So,
so they might be alarmed.
Right, they might be alarmed.
Right.
And that's actually down. And at the same time, there's been a rise in the number of people who either claim no affiliation with religion or, perhaps more telling, will identify as atheists. So if we can get these charts up, we can take a look at a few of these numbers. All right, so the first one here is a measure of religious affiliation. It's a little hard to read, but if you look at, let's pick that yellow line let's do the brown line in the middle. That represents religious affiliation among baby boomers. That would be my generation.
So these are people who are less religiously affiliated.
That is right.
So the lower down, the more religious.
No, the lower down, the more religious. That's right, because this measures the percent of unaffiliated people who don't claim any affiliation. So for my generation, about 13% of the U.S. population claim no religious affiliation. If you look at the top number, that little dot, that represents the millennials. Okay. Kids who are between 18 and 30 years old now. 26% of millennials claim no religious affiliation. So it's double.
So if you said earlier that the number of people identifying as Christian were 78%?
Yes.
So by the time that group is in the same age as the silent generation today, that's the trend that you're thinking about.
That's one of the trends, but you'll see this measures this group over time, and you'll see that in every case they're more or less consistent. There are no big swings. So in the late 70s, the baby boomer generation, 13% were religiously unaffiliated. It's seen some fluctuation, but by the late 2000s, still 13% of my generation. So it's pretty consistent.
So this looks like it's suggesting that individuals are not changing religion,
That's
but
right.
generations
Generational change.
Yeah, okay.
All right, let's go to the next chart here. And that's a very good observation here. Again, there's a lot of information here, but look at the top line. As the number you use, 78% of the total population in America identifies as Christian, of the total population. The next column, 68% of millennials identify as Christian.
Right.
The third column, 81% of generations over 30 years of age.
Yeah.
So you see a marked differentiation there just in the number of people who identify as Christian.
Right. So if this trend continues, that 68% will eventually move over to the total population.
That's right. Right. And that's the trend that alarms religious people, religious leaders in particular. Now let's look down at the bottom. You asked me earlier about whether people are actually identifying as atheists. So if you see at the bottom here, people over 30, 1% of the American population identifies as atheists. Of millennials, 3% of the American population identifies as atheists. That's a small percentage, but it's a threefold increase in terms of percentage of the total population.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the third chart here. This chart is interesting. This measures by generation whether or not you're certain that God exists. All right. So this is the reverse, right? So the higher you are on the chart, the more certain you are of God's existence.
Okay.
We'll pick my generation again, which is the brown line, the boomer. Somewhere between 59 and 65% of boomers claim that they're certain of God's existence. So half of the American population. But of millennials down here, it's a slight drop to 53%. Certainly consistent drop, you'll see, from the red line, which is the greatest generation, to millennials. Quite a significant drop in certainty, measures of certainty.
So something in the early 2000s made them a spike.
Hey, look at that. I would guess maybe 9/11 or some other kind of crisis point. So it depends. That usually is when.
And then they came right back to where they were after that crisis point.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next. And by the way, these three charts, well, the first two charts represent numbers from the Pew Foundation. These numbers come from the Barna research group. They're slightly different, and they actually go on to measure Generation Z. Okay, so Generation Z are teenagers right now, right? Born from '99 to the present. Look at this number. This is of Generation Z, 13% identify as atheists.
So these are people that use the word atheist.
They use the word atheist. Okay. This is not non-affiliation. They're not agnostic. They identify as atheists.
Yeah.
And you can see these numbers are slightly higher than the ones we saw earlier, but that's at least a twofold increase.
Yeah. So
I'm a generation.
I'm a Gen Xer, so they're double my generation.
They're double your
almost
generation.
Triple yours.
Almost triple. That's right.
Right.
So these are numbers that are fairly significant and demonstrate a really recent spike. Now, some of this might be due to age, right? I mean, teenage years are years when you would normally think about kids challenging authority and challenging beliefs, but still, that's
one thing I wonder if this has to do with it. And first, I wanted to say I think for atheists, it's important for us to use the word,
right?
To use the word atheist,
and not feel the shame that you felt in your college classroom.
Exactly, right. I wonder if a lot of these students are not feeling that shame anymore. If it's something about the way that they're raised where that shame has been released.
It very well could be.
One possibility. Another possibility for the Gen Z is that they might just be more aware of it. They might just be more aware of the word and of the possibility and are more able to, I mean, there's an ability to identify just because you're aware that there are other people to identify with. When I was a kid, I didn't actually know about atheism. I hadn't really heard about it much.
That's a very insightful comment, I think. And it suggests, I think, in some ways, this maybe actually will help those religious leaders who are frightened by these stats. It suggests to me that the numbers, while they may be increasing, probably haven't doubled It's just a greater freedom in the cultural
It might be a greater
atmosphere.
increase in reporting.
Right. Yeah.
In fact, yeah. For me, it's important that people use the word because that catch-all term of unaffiliated, that includes people who believe that they're spiritual but not religious.
Exactly.
And those are not atheists.
Right. And in these recent studies, they actually use the word atheist.
Yeah.
Just curious. All right. We'll skip that the last chart ahead because I have two questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
About atheism and its relationship to religion. So,
Okay.
So one of the things that we know that religion does, one of the ways it functions individually, is to help adherents to deal with existential angst, particularly about death. Right. We have some colleagues who write about this in our department, and so religion helps us feel comforted about the process of dying and what happens after death, and the belief in an afterlife gives hope. What does an atheist do with existential angst without a higher power to fall back on, I would guess? I guess would be a way to put that.
A lot of therapy.
A lot of therapy.
I mean, for me, the angst never goes away. For me, I feel it as a genuine terror.
Right.
And it's there. And I know that some atheists talk about, some atheists claim not to feel that, and that's great for them. I do. I definitely do.
Well, you have a Catholic background. I mean, that's.
And I wonder if that's to do with it.
I would imagine that it has to have some sort of impact, right?
I wonder, like some atheists talk in a tone that sounds to me like patting themselves on the back. Of I don't feel this existential angst. I just approach the world with open eyes of truth and accept it for what it is, and that's great. But I feel angst.
Right.
That doesn't help me in any way. But it makes me wonder, why do I feel this? Why does it bug me so much? Why do I have this fear of death? And I wonder if it's because I was raised Catholic, because I was promised an eternal life.
Right.
And to have that taken away.
It's a big promise.
It's a big promise. Yeah. To give up on that is big. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting about religion and atheism is that nobody is an atheist in this country anyways. Nobody is an atheist and uses the word by accident. This country is very dominantly Christian.
Right.
It always kind of makes me laugh when the people who go door to door to preach come to my door and they knock on the door, they ask, have you ever heard of Jesus? And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Have I ever heard of Jesus?
Religious saturation, or cult. Yeah, right, exactly.
Right, yeah. Yes, I've heard of Jesus. Thought about it quite a bit.
Right.
Most people who are atheists are so because they've thought about it quite a bit.
Right.
That's not to, I don't mean to imply that people who are religious because they haven't really thought about it. But I do think that for a lot of people who are religious, they're religious not because they have some deep metaphysical commitment, like they've thought really metaphysically about the nature of the universe and the possibility of supernatural beings and decided, yes, that makes sense. But I suspect that a lot of people are religious really because it provides a sense of community.
Sure.
Because asking somebody to give up their religion doesn't mean I ask them to change their mind about some abstract metaphysical concept. It means that I ask them to give up their family, their community, the place where they were baptized and confirmed, the place where they were married, the place where they maybe said goodbye to their parents for the last time. And that's a lot to give up.
It is a lot. And that's one of the functions, of course, that religion plays, is to provide that sense of community and belonging.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I formed the secular club for the students on our campus is because a lot of people who are atheist and agnostic, they just tend to be lone wolves. They have no community, they have nowhere to go. Religious people have definitely one thing up on us. You have you have every week a meeting.
Right.
You have a place to socialize and to organize. We're disorganized. We have no organization.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful function that the club is playing here.
And that's a large part of what they do, is the club really gives the students a place to feel like they're not alone, and to feel a community, to feel some kind of connection that we otherwise lack.
Right. And that's part of the college experience. Oftentimes we see students who, for one reason or another, feel isolated, who don't plug in. And I would imagine if you find yourself in a group that you must feel out of step with the predominant culture. So that's really an important function.
Yeah, if they do nothing else, I at least want them to do that.
Okay. So tell us, we're about out of time, but you can tell us when and where your club meets and how someone might contact you if they're interested in the club.
Oh, great. The club meets Wednesday evenings. They meet in Greer Hall on our campus in room 116 at about 6:30. The best way to get information is probably to email me. There is a link on the student club's website. If you search for the Secular Appalachian Student Society, you'll find them.
Right.
You'll find them on the university's website.
Yeah. Do you? One last question. Do you get contacted by other groups on campus?
Yes.
Religious groups say, "What are you up to?" and you shouldn't be doing this, or is that?
So, little anecdote. We were having a meeting a couple weeks ago, and a gentleman walked in the class. He thought that it was the meaning of the pre-seminary club.
Okay.
It was exactly the wrong club for him. But he walked in and asked, "Is this the pre-seminary club?" And we said, "No, it's the atheist club." And he just, before turning left, he turned back to us and just said, "Why? Why would you meet? Why do you do this?" And you know, but we actually
I take it he didn't stay.
He didn't stay. No,
Yeah.
tragically.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, thank you. This has been really fascinating.
Thank you.
I've got a stack of questions I want to ask. We'll just continue this conversation on the way back to the office, and maybe have you back sometime. This has been very enlightening.
Well,
So I
thank you for
appreciate
having me.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
anytime.
Great.
Well, thank you for joining us on Religion and Life here at App TV. I want to thank Chris Bartel for stopping by this week. And on the next episode of Religion and Life, we're going to be out of the studio visiting 2 Ashe County churches with famous fresco paintings by the artist Ben Long. We hope you'll join us for this special edition of Religion and Life. Until next time, this is Ozzie Ostwalt.